Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 301, Savage Terror Diary. After solving the problem of the name of America, Marlin started chatting with Columbus. Columbus also hoped to enhance the relationship with his boss through chatting, so he cooperated very well. The topic of their chat was naturally mainly about navigation. Columbus didn't know much about other things. After all, he was not a bookworm like Marlin, who had read too many books in his previous life. As they chatted, they suddenly talked about the sailing diary. Captains generally like to keep diaries, mainly to describe the various characteristics of the route during the voyage, so as to facilitate reference and comparison next time. Before the emergence of longitude and latitude, this was the only reference for the great voyages. Whether we can follow the original route for the next voyage depends entirely on reading the sailing diary. Sailing diary. Suddenly, Marlin was like a madman, stunned there. Columbus saw that Marin seemed to be thinking about something, and did not dare to disturb him, but waited quietly. About half an hour later, Marin finally got it and laughed. There is a way. Sir, what good idea have you come up with? Columbus asked cautiously. Oh, it's like this, Christopher, I want to monopolize the savage continent. But I'm afraid that others will snatch it from me. So, I want to publicize it and scare the Europeans. Because Spain and Portugal are about to renegotiate the Treaty of Tordesillas. If the publicity is good, maybe Spain will give up its attention to the savage continent. However, I haven't thought of a good publicity method before. But today, talking to you, I thought of. That is, with the help of your diary, exaggerate the dangers of the savage continent and scare the Europeans. Marin said proudly. Are you going to modify my diary? Columbus also understood. Yes, and it must be changed greatly, changed into a horror story. Marin said with shining eyes. For example, during your first voyage, weren't the 39 sailors who were left on Hispaniola killed by the local natives? Yes, but those guys brought it upon themselves. In fact, the natives of Hispaniola are still very friendly, Columbus said honestly. I know, but the purpose of this book is to scare Europeans. So, we have to make it more terrifying. For example, Marin vividly recounted the plots of some horror movies in his previous life. On a dark and windy night, the sailors at the door of the camp were standing guard. Suddenly, two scantily clad native women came out of the darkness and seduced the sailors on guard. The sailors on guard thought they had encountered a good thing and wanted to have sex with the native women. However, at this moment, several native men suddenly jumped out of the forest, covered the sailor's mouth, and cut his throat with a knife. Then, a large number of natives took weapons and broke into the sailors' camp at night and began to kill. After the 39 sailors were killed, the local chief ordered their skins to be peeled off and used as mattresses. Wait. Columbus interrupted Marin's why. Sir, the story of the 39 sailors is not only known to me, but also to the Spanish. We can't make it up. Well, that's right, let's do this. You revise it and try to make it more terrifying, but let the Spanish feel it's real. How about it, can you do it? Yes. Columbus thought about it and said. He knew that Marin attached great importance to this matter, so he had better do it well. In this way, he can also make some contributions. Moreover, because of the habit of writing a diary every day, Columbus's literary talent has been practiced, which is pretty good. The Spaniards know that part, Marin can't do anything, and can only let Columbus himself revise it. However, Marin can freely express what the Spaniards don't know. In other words, except for the part where Columbus and the Spaniards were together, which was given to Columbus to revise, the rest were written by Marin. Therefore, Marin first wrote the segment about the Caribbeans. My colleague Amerigo once led a fleet to explore the sea area in the west. The Greater Antilles to the north of that sea area is mainly inhabited by the gentle Arawak people. I am very lucky. When I explored this new area, I first arrived at the territory of the Arawak people in the north. So, I am still alive. If I had first landed in the Lesser Antilles where the Caribbeans in the south were entrenched, death might have been waiting for me. The Caribs are a very brutal race, because they eat people. According to the Arawak people, hundreds of years ago, the islands in this sea area were actually the territory of the Arawak people. However, the Carib people appeared from the tropical rainforest on the southern land. This is a savage and bloodthirsty race. They use canoes hollowed out from huge old trees to roam this sea. The Caribs first invaded the Lesser Antilles in the south. Over the course of hundreds of years, the Caribs killed all the Arawak men on the southern islands, leaving only the women. So now, the Carib men all speak Carib, but the women speak Arawak, because they were all spoils of war taken back by the Carib men. And those Arawak men who were killed were more miserable, they all became food for the Arawak. After the Caribbeans captured the Arawak men, they would cut them into several pieces with knives, hollow out their internal organs, and feed them to their vicious dogs. Then, the killed Arawak men would be roasted on the fire. My colleague Amerigo once saw with his own eyes that the Caribbeans cut off the thighs of 2 poor Arawak men and roasted them on the fire rack. Later, Amerigo and his sailors, together with the Arawak people on Grenada Island, killed the dozen man-eating monsters. After they eliminated the dozen man-eating Caribbean bandits, the 2 human thighs roasted on the ham were already cooked and exuded an enticing aroma. But Amerigo and his men vomited. My monarch Marin is very lucky, because Grenada is the only island that has not been occupied by the Caribs. In order to get help, the Arawak people accepted his rule. The first thing that George, the governor of Grenada, did after he arrived on the island was to build a strong castle. And built a very long wall. Otherwise, the attack of the Caribs could not be stopped at all. Fortunately, the castle is strong enough, and the surviving Arawak people are willing to help in the battle, otherwise, they will be caught by the Caribs and made into roasted human meat. Moreover, the Caribs have begun to move north, constantly invading the Greater Antilles Islands where the Arawak people live in the north. The goal of the Caribs is to kill and eat all the Arawak men, and then forcibly occupy the Arawak women. In this sea area, most of the indigenous people seem to carry the syphilis virus. At the beginning, I took my men to Hispaniola. You know, they are all strong guys who can't control their subordinates, so something happened with the local women. Then, syphilis was brought back to the European continent. I admit this, I am guilty. Of course, I don't know why the women here actually carry this disease. Moreover, the locals are fine with this disease, they just feel a little itchy. But if Europeans get it, it's terrible. On the way back, I threw a group of boys into the sea. Because they started to fester. So, the biggest problem in colonizing the wild continent is that you'd better not send a group of energetic young men here. After all, it's hard for energetic young men to resist having something with local women. But once something happens, it's easy to get syphilis, and the chance is extremely high. Moreover, this disease does not break out immediately after being infected, but it will break out after a few months. If a young man infected with this disease returns to Europe before the disease breaks out, and then finds a female branch girl, then it's over. They will infect the female branch girls with this disease, and then the female branch girls don't just receive one guest every day. Then, in the months before the syphilis breaks out, the female branch girls will infect hundreds of female guests with this disease. And these female guests may find other female branch girls in the months before the onset of the disease, and other female branch girls will infect syphilis to hundreds of other female guests. It will spread repeatedly like this, and soon, tens of thousands of people will get the disease. The reason why this disease broke out in Naples was very simple. Among the sailors who went to Hispaniola, several were from Sicily. Before the syphilis outbreak, those sailors returned to their hometown and found local female prostitutes. Then, a Neapolitan happened to come to Sicily and happened to visit the female prostitute who was infected with syphilis, and also contracted syphilis. Then, this unaware man returned to the kingdom of Naples, visited the local female prostitutes, and passed syphilis to the female prostitutes in the kingdom of Naples. Then, syphilis spread in the kingdom of Naples. When the French came, they happened to encounter an outbreak of syphilis, and then they were unlucky. Chapter 302, Savage Horror Diary, Part 2. Marin wrote furiously, continuing to describe the horrors of America in the name of Columbus, with a mixture of truth and falsehood, so, I concluded that if you want to colonize the West Indies, it is best to find missionaries who are chaste. Because they can withstand the temptation of those native women and not be infected with syphilis. But, I am worried that those missionaries will not be able to beat the Caribbeans, and will be killed by the Caribbeans and eaten as barbecue. And those mercenaries who can beat the Caribbeans, everyone knows their virtues, robbery, rape women, and all kinds of evil. If they are sent to the wild continent, they will definitely be infected with syphilis and bring it back. Thanks to the Vatican, Europe, under the leadership of the Vatican, implemented a long period of abstinence throughout Europe to eliminate syphilis. However, ordinary people are not devout priests, and it is difficult for them to control their lower body. Therefore, as long as you dare to send people there, the probability of contracting syphilis and bringing it back to the country is very high. My monarch, Marin, has soldiers with good discipline. However, they still contracted syphilis in Grenada, which led to the death of a large number of people. As for other European armies, especially mercenaries, their discipline is definitely not as good as that of the East Frisian army, not to mention their combat effectiveness. If those poorly disciplined mercenaries are sent there, they will inevitably bring back syphilis and infect the whole of Europe. Therefore, colonizing the wild continent is a very dangerous thing. The safest way is to send a group of castrated mercenaries, so that they will not be easily infected with syphilis. However, which mercenary is willing to be castrated? If the king wants to castrate his soldiers, the soldiers will angrily chop off the king's head. Let's talk about the new place my monarch asked me to explore, Panama. In this place, syphilis is only one of the horrors. There are even more terrifying things. The mosquitoes here carry a terrible disease. As long as you are bitten by a mosquito, you are very likely to contract malaria and a fatal disease called yellow fever. According to the description of the locals, this disease will cause high fever accompanied by chills, severe headaches and body aches in the early stages, and then the patient will feel weak, have a poor appetite, feel nauseous, vomit, have diarrhea, etc. Then, in the later stages, there will be terrible conditions such as internal bleeding, bleeding from the mouth and nose, and blood in the urine. By that time, it is basically incurable and can only wait to die. Even among the locals in Panama, yellow fever is a terrible disease with a high mortality rate. But the strange thing is that the locals seem to have a high resistance to the disease. Just like syphilis, it is just a troublesome disease for the Indians, but Europeans will die if they get it. A sailor on my ship was bitten by a local mosquito, and a few days later, he really got yellow fever and died. I was very scared, so when I slept at night in Panama, I wrapped myself in canvas. In this way, mosquitoes couldn't bite me. But it was really hot. I swear, I will never go to Panama again. Later, I went to East Frisia's 2 colonies in the north of the savage continent, the Twin Islands and Cape Breton Island. The climate on these 2 islands is very good. However, the land area is too small. Especially the Twin Islands, which is only slightly larger than Texel Island. I was very curious and asked Governor Terra why he didn't develop on the savage continent. However, Governor Terra told me that the land was too dangerous. Yes, it's very dangerous on land. How dangerous is it? The Indian men on land are good at hunting and archery. They have been hunting animals in the dense jungles since they were young. Therefore, adult Indian men are no worse than English longbowmen in archery. It's just that, due to their lack of civilization, the range of their bows and arrows is far less than that of the English longbows. If they were on flat ground, the English longbowmen would definitely be able to defeat these Indian archers. However, in the dense forest, this group of people are elusive. You can't catch them, but they can sneak attack you with cold arrows in the dark forest at any time. Moreover, they are also good at making plant poisons. Put poison on the arrows, and as long as people are shot, they will die soon. Not only that, they are also good at setting traps. For example, dig a pit and camouflage it. If a person falls in, he will be directly stabbed to death by the wooden stakes at the bottom. In addition, there are traps on the trees. If you accidentally touch a vine, maybe a big rock will fall from the tree and kill you. The most terrifying thing is that they have a high level of poison. Those poison arrows and wooden stakes will be smeared with a powerful poison. As long as people are scratched on the skin and come into contact with the poison, it is easy to cause death. Marin moved the characteristics of the blood-killing poison on China's Cheong Island to this diary that doesn't look like a novel. Governor Terra coveted the vast continent and led 500 soldiers to try to attack the land. As a result, before they met the Indians, more than 30 soldiers fell into the trap, and 20 of them died of poisoning. After encountering the Indians did not fight Governor Terra's 500 troops head-on, but hid in the jungle, fighting with Terra's army, and occasionally shooting cold arrows with poison on the arrowheads. After a few days, Terra's 500 troops lost more than 150 people, and as a result, there was not even a shadow of an Indian. They found the Indian village, but found that there was no one there. In desperation, Governor Terra had to give up the plan to attack the mainland. You know, the village they attacked was just a small village of 500 people. As a result, they suffered such a heavy loss. If they encountered a large tribe of several thousand people, it is estimated that the 500 people would all be killed in battle. Fortunately, the colony of East Frisia in the north of the savage continent is an island far away from the continent. Otherwise, the Indians would have rushed up and killed all the Europeans in the colony. According to Governor Terra's report, those Indians are all good archers. If they were given war horses, they would probably be powerful Mongolian cavalry. Unfortunately, there are no horses in the savage continent, otherwise no European army can stop the Indian cavalry. It is said that in the inland area near the Twin Island colony, there is an extremely powerful Indian alliance, the Iroquois Tribal Alliance. This insufficient alliance can dispatch tens of thousands of Indian warriors who are good at archery and spears. If you want to defeat such an alliance, tens of thousands of troops are not enough. Unless you can cut down all the trees in the forest on the savage continent first. Otherwise, once you enter the forest, 100,000 troops are not enough to kill the tens of thousands of Iroquois warriors. Therefore, East Frisia's colonies in the savage continent are all islands: Grenada Island, Twin Islands, Cape Breton Island, Cuba Island, Panama. Because it is too difficult to capture the continent. Especially the Indians in the northern savage continent are good at guerrilla warfare in the forest. No matter how many people go, they can't do anything about them. In short, the Indians are a group of natives with tough folk customs and strong combat effectiveness. If you want to conquer the savage continent, you need to be prepared for a long war and be prepared to get sick. Of course, you must also be prepared to be killed and roasted by the Indians. Finally, after several days of hard work, Marin finished writing this half-true, half-false, and somewhat exaggerated Diary of Savage Terror. However, Columbus's part is not yet finished. When Columbus's part is finished, Marin plans to publish it immediately and sell it all over Europe. His purpose, of course, was to let the Spanish and Portuguese see the terrible side of the savage continent before the negotiations of the Treaty of Tordesillas began. In this way, by then, neither country would be ready to take over America. In fact, not all the stories in this savage horror diary are fabricated, but many of them are true. Historically, the reason why the Spanish were able to conquer Mexico and Peru but did not touch North America for a long time was not because they did not pay attention to it, but because the Indians in the North American jungles were indeed too fierce and good at sneak attacks, which gave the Spanish colonists a headache. Mexico and Peru, on the other hand, belonged to the plateau area, with no forests, mostly open plains, mostly cultivated land and grasslands. Such a landform is very conducive to the performance of the Spanish army. After all, the Indians' technological level is low, and they are naturally defeated by the fully armed Spanish army. Therefore, the Spanish in America could only occupy the plateau areas of the Andes and several islands such as Cuba for a long time. As for those tropical rainforests and North American forests, the Spanish did not control them. Moreover, they did not have enough troops. The first British colony in North America, Jamestown, was besieged by Indians for a long time. Because of the lack of food, people were cannibalistic. However, they gradually advanced by building fortresses and finally established the 13 colonies in North America. However, the British were still not enough. If it were Marin, he would never blindly oppose all Indians, but would choose the strategy of pulling one faction and fighting one faction, provoke infighting among Indians, and then take the opportunity to gain a foothold in North America. This method is the specialty of the British in the later period. With this method, Britain became a famous shit-stirrer in Europe and made the European continent restless. Such methods are even more unspeakable when used on Indians. Of course, Marin compiled the Wild Horror Diary and published it in the name of Columbus for the purpose of scaring the Spaniards. Therefore, Marin could not tell them that Mexico and Peru were not forests. He would only use the example of the powerful Indians in the North American jungle to scare the Spaniards. At the same time, they also used syphilis, malaria and yellow fever in tropical regions to scare the Spaniards. Ultimately, they fueled the Spanish to abandon America. Chapter 303 Lead and Zinc Mines in Newfoundland. Soon, Columbus's part of the manuscript was also completed. Marin immediately revised the two manuscripts, mainly to adjust the tone of the part he wrote and the part written by Columbus, striving to make them similar, so as to avoid readers from noticing that the two parts were not written by the same person. In addition, Marin thought about it and felt that the dangerous things he had written before were not scary enough, so he added legends of many existing and non-existent terrifying creatures such as killer bees, piranhas, and ants. In addition, the distribution of some terrifying creatures was moved from the Amazon jungle to most parts of the Americas, just to scare people. In fact, killer bees are the horrible product of the hybridization of African honey bees and Brazilian American honey bees. It was not until the 20th century that Brazilian zoologists introduced African honey bees, which escaped from the research center and hybridized with native Brazilian honey bees before they came to the world. And the man-eating ants are just a legend. No man-eating ants will hunt living people. They just eat dead people. But it doesn't matter. There are no zoologists in Europe to verify this statement. Even if there are, they don't have the courage to verify it. After all, there are no advanced instruments and various safety protection measures like in later generations. Anyone who goes to explore the tropical rain forests of America is extremely likely to die. In order to enhance the persuasiveness, Marin also drew the graphics of those terrifying creatures in the style of sketches as illustrations to enhance their authenticity. After the book was compiled, Columbus was sweating and felt very scared. What's more terrifying is that Marin told him that these species really exist, not fiction, but their distribution range was exaggerated by him. After hearing Marin's guarantee, Columbus thought about it and added this paragraph to the book: "In the name of God, I swear that these species really exist. If there is a lie, I am willing to accept the punishment of hell." Marin was very satisfied with this paragraph, because once this was said, no one would not believe it. Because in Europe, when the Catholic power was so strong, no one dared to joke with God, and it was a public written oath. Of course, Columbus was also very smart. He just swore that these species really existed, and he did not say that the distribution range of those species in the book was correct. Even if future generations found that it was wrong, they could not blame him. Marin was naturally very satisfied with Columbus's cleverness. So, before the book was published, Columbus received a royalty of 10,000 gold coins from Marin. Then, Marin found someone to translate the book into Spanish and Portuguese. As soon as the translation was completed, he used lead type to typeset and printed it in large quantities. Then he found an intermediary to publish it in Spain and Portugal, and made sure that it would be seen by the upper echelons of Spain and Portugal before the Spanish-Portuguese negotiations began, so as to influence their decision-making. However, even as a time traveler with a pig's foot halo, not everything goes smoothly. For example, there was unfortunate news from the Tara Hill on the island of Ireland. Fon Gaulé sent people to dig more than 20 wells in a row. Not to mention reaching a depth of 50 meters, within 20 meters, all these deep wells were leaking a lot of water. You know, in this year, wells were all dug manually. As long as there is water seepage, it is impossible to continue digging. Then, all the more than 20 prospecting wells became water wells. No wonder, the island of Ireland faces the North Atlantic warm current and has abundant rainfall. This also leads to the fact that the plains in Ireland are very rich in groundwater. Basically, this is similar to the Yangtze River Delta region. As long as you dig a few meters or more than 10 meters underground, water will inevitably seep and become a well. This is why Tara, the largest lead zinc mine in Europe, was not discovered until the 1970s. If it were shallowly buried, it would have been discovered by prospecting experts long ago. Why wait until the 20th century? Moreover, the mining of Tara lead zinc mine in later generations also relied on machines, and the role of people was to control the machines to process the ore. Marin was unwilling to give up and wanted to use a pump to solve it. However, according to the report sent back by Fon Gaulé, the water seepage rate of each of the more than 20 deep wells was amazing. The speed of the steam engine was only about 50 revolutions per minute, and the pumping speed was definitely not able to keep up with the water seepage rate. In other words, Marin's plan to mine the Tara lead zinc mine completely failed. The main thing is that with the current level of technology, it is not possible to mine. Marin sat on the chair with his whole body slumped in a chair, with infinite melancholy in his eyes. He has put in a lot of effort for this Tara lead zinc mine. For the Tara lead zinc mine, he sponsored Earl Edward in large quantities, gave Cork City to Earl Edward, and gave Earl Edward great support in money and materials. Although it is said that supporting Earl Edward means harming Britain. However, seeking Tara lead zinc mine is also a very important goal of Marin. But now, the land of Tara Mountain has been taken. However, there are no conditions for mining. Therefore, all Marin's efforts have been in vain. My zinc. My tinplate. My galvanized counterfeit money. Marin lamented again and again. For 2 or 3 days in a row, Marin was in no mood to do anything, and his face was full of sadness. Even at night, Angela put on a uniform to seduce him in order to make him happy, but she failed to arouse Marin's interest. It was not until 3 days later, when Marin was staring at the map in a daze and remembered a piece of information from the depths of his past life, that Marin suddenly perked up. Back then, when he was in high school, Marin was a famous history emperor and geography prince. If it weren't for his lack of political awareness, which led to average political scores, he might have been the overlord of liberal arts. Although not as strong as history, Marin is also very strong in geography, as strong as his high school teacher. This paragraph is not fabricated, it is actually about Lao Nyo. Although Lao Nyo chose the wrong science, many liberal arts students still asked me to tutor geography. If he studied liberal arts, Lao Nyo should be able to get into a 211 school with history and geography. Because Lao Nyo only scored 107 in physics in the college entrance examination. If he switched to history and geography, each subject must be more than 135. Of course, Lao Nyo went to a rural high school, and maybe the level of the teacher was also scum, so his score was about the same as Lao Nyo's. As a history emperor and geography prince, Marin had a hobby different from ordinary people in his previous life, that is, he liked to read history and geography books as novels. Of course, there was another kind of knowledge mixed in it, military. Marin was not only a history and geography fan in his previous life, but also a military enthusiast. Marin is very interested in wars in ancient and modern times, both at home and abroad. The reason why I read history and geography books as novels is that when I read about various major events and wars in ancient and modern times, I also read related historical and geographical knowledge. The combination of these three kinds of knowledge, plus my interest, made Marin a history and geography master at that time, crushing his peers. In fact, Marin's ideal in his previous life was to be a general. Unfortunately, he read too much and became nearsighted, and he was rejected in the physical examination when he applied for the military academy. The above are all Lao Nyo's personal experiences. As long as you combine military, history and geography and study them together, it is hard not to be good at history and geography. Baidu was not popular in that era. Lao Nyo didn't like to read Xiongniao, but only liked to read military magazines and read history and geography books. History and geography became so awesome. But unfortunately, he chose science. When he was studying geography magazines in his previous life, he had seen an article introducing Newfoundland. It said that there are many kinds of mineral resources on Newfoundland, but the reserves are not rich. For example, there is a lead zinc mine in a place called Bawkins, north of the Red Indian Lake, a large lake in the west of Newfoundland. The reserves are not large and it is a small and medium-sized deposit. Among them, the lead reserves of the Bawkins deposit are only about 234,000 tons, and the grade is also low, about 1.3. As for zinc, the reserves are larger, with 1.08 million tons, and the grade is also higher, with 6%. Such reserves and grades were not originally in Marin's eyes. Marin is concerned about world-class mines such as Mount Isa, Broken Hill, and New Brunswick No. 12 lead zinc mine. However, these large mines are deep in the inland or far away in Australia, and Marin is temporarily unable to get involved. Although New Brunswick is on the edge of Cape Breton Island. However, Marin does not have the confidence to conquer the Indians on the mainland yet. So, it can only be postponed. However, the mine on Newfoundland is different. Because I know the exact location. I saw a map in that geography magazine in my previous life. It was probably near a small lake above Red Indian Lake. It was very attractive. Moreover, although there are Indians on Newfoundland, there are not many. As long as I send 1,000 people, I can conquer the Indians on the island. Then, I can mine the lead zinc mine with peace of mind. In addition, there is another point, that is, the city of Corner Brook on the west coast of Newfoundland is not only a port, but also a limestone mining center. Moreover, it seems not far from Bawkins. What is limestone? It is an important raw material for making cement. In addition, Marin has now moved the salt boiling base on Texel Island. In that case, as long as we find limestone, we can set up a cement manufacturing center here, produce a large amount of fly ash cement, and then ship it back to Europe. And it is not difficult to send people from Cape Breton Island to Corner Brook to establish a base. Then, send another prospecting team to look for limestone mines around. Once they are found, they can build a cement manufacturing center based on the coal and fly ash from Cape Breton Island and the limestone from Newfoundland. The lead zinc mine in Bawkins doesn't seem to be difficult to find. Just find Red Indian Lake and then go up to the small lake. Bawkins is by the lake. Although the Bawkins lead zinc mine has a small reserve, it is definitely not difficult to mine. After all, it is a mine, not an underground deep mine. Besides, there won't be as much groundwater as the Terra lead zinc mine. As long as it is mined, using the coal from Cape Breton Island, using a simple blast furnace, and adding a condenser for extracting zinc, lead and zinc can be easily obtained. Moreover, the geography book I read in my previous life said that the Bawkins deposit is only the largest lead zinc deposit on Newfoundland, and there are other deposits. In addition, there are iron ore, copper ore and other resources on Newfoundland, but the reserves are not large. As long as they are found, they can be used. Chapter 304, The Wolf Fong Commando. There are Indians on Newfoundland Island, and Cape Breton Island has reported this long ago. When the fishing boats on Cape Breton Island went to the Newfoundland fishing grounds in the southeast of Newfoundland Island to fish, they saw Indian canoes coming out to fish in the southeast corner of Newfoundland Island. However, because it is a canoe, no matter how big it is not suitable for activities in the deep Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, Indian fishermen can only fish near the coast of Newfoundland Island and dare not go deep. The fishing boats on Cape Breton Island are at least dozens of tons, so they dare to operate on the sea. One of the two parties is in the deep sea area, actually it is not a deep sea area, just a little far from the coastline, and the other is in the shallow water area near the coast, so naturally there is no intersection. Previously, there was a report that the Indian fishermen near the coast seemed to send signals to communicate with the fishing boats on Cape Breton Island. However, the fishermen on Cape Breton Island were afraid of being hurt by the Indians and did not dare to approach the coastline. Besides, they could not understand Indian language. Newfoundland Island is about 111,000 square kilometers, almost catching up with England. However, Marin, who is familiar with geography, knows that the temperature on this island is not high. There is more snowfall in the northern region. This is mainly because Newfoundland faces the North Atlantic warm current in the southeast, but the northern coast faces the Labrador cold current. It is precisely because of the collision and mixing of the North Atlantic warm current and the Labrador cold current that the famous Newfoundland fishing grounds appeared. However, this also leads to climate differences between the north and south of Newfoundland. The southern coast is relatively warmer and close to the temperate climate, not yet temperate, due to the influence of the North Atlantic warm current. On the other hand, the climate on the north coast is closer to the frigid zone and there is more snowfall because of the Labrador cold current. Even the climate on the south coast cannot rise because of the influence of the Labrador cold current. In summer, the average temperature on Newfoundland is only 10 to 15 degrees. Cape Breton Island, not far to the south, is blocked by the Labrador cold current by Newfoundland, so the summer temperature is relatively high, sometimes breaking the 30-degree high temperature mark. Therefore, agriculture can be carried out on Cape Breton Island, but not on Newfoundland Island. The main economy of Newfoundland in later generations is also fishing, logging and mining. At most, you can do some animal husbandry. After all, reindeer, sheep and the like are not afraid of the cold in winter. However, reindeer are easier to raise. Because reindeer have an ability in winter, that is, they can dig through the snow and eat moss and dead grass on the ground. Sheep, it seems, do not have this ability. Once a blizzard comes and lasts for a long time, reindeer can survive, but sheep are difficult to survive. Unless the herders prepare hay in advance. Otherwise, sheep do not have the ability to dig through the snow to find food. Although Newfoundland is very large, it is almost catching up with England. However, because of its harsh climate, Marin estimates that there are at most a few thousand Indians on the island. Moreover, Marin does not need to occupy the entire island of Newfoundland immediately. He only needs to occupy the western port of Corner Brook, the nearby limestone mine, and the Bacchans lead zinc mine 60 or 70 kilometers away. However, although it is only a few dozen kilometers from Corner Brook to Bacchans, the terrain is very complicated and you need to walk a lot of mountain roads. Even, you need to cross the big lake. Therefore, Marin plans to send a group of mules to walk the mountain road. As for crossing the Grand Lake, it is also easy. Marin plans to make a batch of rowing boats with a load capacity of about 10 tons. This kind of boat is very suitable for sailing in inland areas. Moreover, with a load capacity of 10 tons, it can also carry a lot of lead and zinc ore. After all, the amount of lead and zinc used these days is not large. If you mine too much lead and zinc ore and smelt too much lead and zinc, there may not be anyone to buy it. In order to protect the safety of the lead and zinc mines and the safety of Corner Brook, it is also necessary to send troops to attack those Indian tribes that threaten the safety of the base and the transportation line. Therefore, Marin plans to select 1,000 warriors to enter Newfoundland Island to protect the safety of immigrants and attack threatening Indian tribes. The strongest thing about the Indians is probably their bows and arrows. Therefore, Marin decided to form a plate-armored infantry to attack the Indians' front line. Once a group of plate-armored infantry rushed into a group of Indian archers, it was no less than a pack of wolves rushing into a flock of sheep. The rest was just slaughtered. The only problem was the selection of Miao's plate-armored infantry. You know, wearing plate armor for a long time is definitely a test of strength and endurance. Therefore, ordinary people can't do it. Not to mention the plate-armored infantry, even those plate-armored knights have been trained since childhood, and they have been training for more than 10 years before they can easily wear plate armor to fight. Of course, facing the plate-armored infantry of the Indians, it does not take more than 10 years to train. Because the plate-armored knights' more than 10 years of hard work are not just to be able to wear plate armor, but mainly to practice various martial arts. The plate-armored infantry against the Indians is different. They don't need any martial arts. As long as they can wear plate armor and charge, and can persist until the Indians' battle formation is broken and defeated, that's enough. Therefore, when selecting plate armored infantry, as long as they are strong and have good endurance, that's enough. Martial arts or something, no need, just pick up something and rush into the Indian crowd and smash it. According to this standard, Marin conducted an open audition in the entire army, except for the garrison in the Duchy of Schleswig. After many rounds of selection, 300 muscle sticks were finally found, all of whom were perverts who could run for a long time in plate armor. Moreover, Marin was surprised to find that these people were all from mountain people, and they were the best at running. Think about it, they have been walking on mountain roads since they were young, and it is not difficult to walk dozens of miles. Maybe, they are carrying things while walking on mountain roads. Why are Ethiopians so good at marathon competitions in later generations? It is because Ethiopia is a plateau country. People over there have been used to walking on mountain roads since they were young, and they don't have a car. They run dozens of miles every day. Can they not be good at running marathons? Similarly, the German mountain people of this era were also very tough, walking dozens of miles without breathing. In fact, there were many soldiers in Marin's army who walked dozens of miles without breathing. Because Marin mainly selected mountain people to serve as soldiers. However, there are not many people who can charge without breathing while wearing dozens of kilograms of plate armor. Marin picked, and only selected 300 perverts. However, before he started training those muscle stick mountain people, the captain of the special forces, Cage, came to ask for people. Cage was also jealous of these perverts. Before, he was ordered to form a special forces. Unfortunately, Marin did not cooperate with him to select people from the whole army. So, Cage searched, and only found 20 good seedlings with strong bodies and flexible minds. But now, seeing 300 muscle stick perverts at a glance, Cage's saliva flowed down. So, he came to pester Marin and asked him to select another round. Marin had no choice, and the special forces were also important, so he let Cage choose. As a result, Cage took a ruthless hand and picked 50 of the 300 muscle sticks with the most flexible skills and brains. The rest are real muscle sticks with only muscles and strength. Moreover, the number was also auspicious, 250. Then, Marin released Khan, the #1 muscle king in East Frisia, to train these 250 muscle men. Their weapons were also uniform, maces. Seeing the 250 muscle men swinging maces vigorously, Marin's mouth twitched. Then, Marin gave this vanguard army composed of 250 muscle men, which was specially used for charging into battle, a very resounding name, Wolf-Fang Commando. In fact, Marin originally wanted to call this group of musclemen the Mace Commando. After all, their weapons are all maces. However, this sounds a bit silly. Then, he changed it to the more pleasant, Wolf-Fang Commando. Chapter 305 Supporting Arms. To be honest, watching Khan training with these 250 muscle sticks, Marin felt it was very eye-catching. Why? The stick method that Khan taught them really lacked beauty, but was waving randomly up and down and left and right. If you want to give this stick method a name, Crazy Stick Method is definitely a suitable name. Of course, the use of maces to perform crazy stick methods is still very lethal. 250 muscle sticks, wearing invulnerable plate armor, holding maces full of nails, rushed over and waved up and down, like crazy. Moreover, whoever the mace touches will have some flesh torn off, which will hurt you to death. Such 250 invulnerable but destructive lunatics rushing towards you, just ask if you are afraid. If there is a musket team, these 250 lunatics can naturally be knocked down with volleys. But where are the Indians with muskets? Their weapons are just a few, earth bows and arrows, javelins, stone axes, flying axes, wooden sticks, well, there are also stone throwing. Moreover, these weapons are all stone tools, not metal. Any of these weapons will have no effect on the full set of plate armor worn by these 250 muscle sticks. At most, it will hurt them if it hits the joints. However, facing their maces full of nails, the Indians without armor are unlucky. If you are scratched by this kind of mace, there will be several blood holes or several deep blood marks on your body, which is extremely painful. It can even make you lose your combat effectiveness due to the pain. If these muscle sticks have more strength, they can directly smash the nails on the mace deeply into the flesh, taking away half of their lives directly. And if you hit the head, it will be knocked out in one move. Therefore, the Wolf-Tooth Commando using maces is extremely lethal. Moreover, it can also bring fear to the opponent. Of course, if you don't want to kill them all, you can also let these 250 perverts use ordinary wooden sticks, which can still beat the opponents to a pulp, but few people will die. Using maces means bloody wars, and using wooden sticks means law enforcement to suppress riots. Generally speaking, what kind of weapons to use depends on what kind of tribe the other party is. If it is a moderate tribe, if you can conquer it, try to injure them with wooden sticks instead of using maces to maim or kill them. If it is a radical tribe that cannot be conquered, you can only use maces to kill them. The reason why Marin acquiesced to Khan teaching them the weird, crazy stick method is because these 250 muscle sticks are civilians who have never learned martial arts. Their biggest advantage is that they are strong and perverted. At this time, it is too late to let them learn martial arts from scratch. So, Khan came up with a solution: teach them the crazy stick method. The crazy stick method is easy to use and is a range attack. On the battlefield, 250 invulnerable madmen holding maces and rushing into the enemy camp will bring terrible destructive power. Not to mention the Indians, the armies of civilized countries without muskets will also be afraid when they encounter such a group of madmen. At the beginning, when Khan first followed Marin as a servant, he didn't know martial arts at all. However, relying on this set of crazy stick method that doesn't require brains and has no rules, as well as his own terrifying power, Marin and Schwartz were both bloody in the battle on foot. Even the humanoid monster Adler was beaten by Khan's crazy stick method in the battle on foot. Later, because of the martial arts of Schwartz and Adler and other guys with good martial arts skills teaching Khan martial arts, Khan became more and more perverted. Today, 10 years later, Khan is not only invincible in the battle on foot, but also in the battle on horseback. Back then, Khan picked up a stick and smashed it with great speed and force. Now, after practicing martial arts for 10 years, Khan's mace is still fast and powerful, but the direction of attack is always the opponent's vital point. In the art of war, it is, attack the enemy and save him. The opponent who used to take a long time to defeat can now be knocked away by a few sticks. However, martial arts are not so easy to achieve. Khan has been Marin's attendant for 10 years and has practiced for 10 years to reach that level. And the 250 muscle sticks in front of him are obviously zero-based. Moreover, Khan knows that Marin needs them to form combat effectiveness quickly. Therefore, the crazy stick method that is random and unsystematic, purely relying on instinct, but with great destructive power, has become the first choice. Perhaps, a plate-armored infantryman using the crazy stick method has weaknesses on his body, which can be easily exploited by others to attack. However, 250 muscle sticks, waving maces together, rushing over with the crazy stick method of range attack, even Lu Bu has to run for his life. At least, Khan felt that he could not defeat these 250 lunatics alone. Because the mace was too lethal, Khan finally let each of these guys be 1.5 meters apart. Because the dancing maces of these guys filled up all the gaps. When 250 muscle sticks charged together waving maces, the wolf wind that blew up was basically a meat grinder, and whoever touched it would be tragic. Suddenly, Marin wanted to form a mace commando team on his own. If the opponent did not have muskets and artillery, this crazy commando team could completely catch the opponent off guard, even the Swiss phalanx could charge. However, Marin also knew that these perverts also had weaknesses. That is, if the physical strength was exhausted, they could only lie there and wait to be captured. Therefore, after careful consideration, Marin also equipped these muscle sticks with corresponding arms as a response and cover. As for what arms to match, Marin thought again and again, and chose the musketeers and sword and shield soldiers. Needless to say, the musketeers are the guarantee of long-range strike force and the main output force. The sword and shield soldiers are mainly the cover troops for the musketeers and the Wolf-Fang commando. After all, if the Wolf-Fang commando is almost out of strength, the sword and shield soldiers can go up and protect the exhausted Wolf-Fang commando soldiers and bring them back. Similarly, the musketeers are also vulnerable to the attacks of the opponent's archers. The sword and shield soldiers can also guard the musketeers to protect their safety. Moreover, the sword and shield soldiers are not only auxiliary. If they are in close combat, the sword and shield soldiers can also kill the enemy and charge. And if the opponent wants to use archers to attack from a distance, the sword and shield soldiers can cover the musketeers and shoot against them. Generally speaking, ordinary sword and shield soldiers hold round shields as big as the lid of a cooking pot. If it is an iron shield, ordinary infantry will definitely not be able to hold it. So, it can only be a wooden shield. However, a wooden shield alone cannot stop the chopping of a heavy battle axe and the smashing of a heavy hammer. Therefore, a layer of iron sheet is needed on the outside of the wooden shield to strengthen the shield's defense. As for armor, as an auxiliary soldier, the sword and shield soldiers must not wear heavy armor. Otherwise, their physical strength will not keep up. However, as a defensive soldier, they cannot be without armor. Therefore, sword and shield soldiers must be equipped with a light and highly protective armor. The first thing Marin thought of was rattan armor. After all, Marin had read too much Romance of the Three Kingdoms in his previous life and knew that rattan armor was a very good armor in the era of cold weapons. However, Marin did not have the technology to make rattan armor, nor did he have tung oil specifically for making rattan armor. So Marin had to give up. Then, Marin thought of paper armor, but for the same reason there was no relevant technology. Then came cotton armor, but not to mention that Marin did not have so much cotton in his hands now, and there was no relevant technology. The weight of the real cotton armor alone was too much for the infantry to bear. Because the real cotton armor with iron sheet lining weighed 40 kilograms. The cotton armor of the 8 banners of the Qing dynasty, that is, the Charge and Death Squad, was so heavy. The infantrymen wearing such heavy armor could not run at all. Therefore, in the TV series, only the 8 banners masters would wear cotton armor. Because they were riding horses, while the infantrymen wore cloth clothes with the word courage on them, and they went up like this. Then, Marin thought of wicker armor. In his previous life, Marin saw a post on the internet saying that in the Warring States period of Japanese village chiefs, some princes were too poor to equip their soldiers with metal weapons and armor, so they simply let low-level soldiers wear wicker armor and hold bamboo spears to participate in the fights between village chiefs. The reason why the samurai sword is so sharp is said to be used to cut the wicker armor. Thinking of wicker armor, Marin recalled the wicker baskets he used in his previous life, which seemed to be quite strong. However, whether in Europe or America, there seemed to be no willow trees. The willow trees in Europe and the United States seem to have been introduced from China later. Even bamboo. So, wicker armor is also ruled out. Finally, Marin thought of a suitable armor: wood armor. Of course, it is not a plate armor made of wood, but a pierced armor made of wood chips. Speaking of this pierced armor, Marin unconsciously remembered the bamboo cushion on the office chair in the summer in his previous life. It seems that wearing a bamboo cushion directly can provide good protection. What Marin wants to do is to make a lapel armor by connecting wood pieces together. Moreover, this technology is ready. Because the hem of the horse armor of the knight's warhorse is lapel armor. As long as you find a craftsman who is good at making horse armor, you can easily make lapel armor with wood pieces. However, if you only use wood pieces, the protection of such lapel armor is very poor. Therefore, Marin plans to nail small iron sheets on the outside of those wood pieces. With iron sheets outside, even if they are not very thick, they can play a great blocking role and prevent the wood piece armor from being damaged by the enemy. In addition, the breastplate of the sword and shield soldier is made of a whole piece of wood, covered with iron sheets on the outside. Moreover, it is a 3/4 breastplate. Such a breastplate does not affect the twisting of the soldier's waist. As for the 3/4 of the breastplate below, it is the hem of the skirt made of wood piece lapel armor covered with iron sheets. As for the helmet, although it is also a wooden helmet covered with iron sheets, Marin still thinks that the iron sheets should be thicker. Otherwise, it would be easy to die if shot in the head by the Indians' bows and arrows. After thinking it over, Marin ordered the craftsman workshop at the Galway Reservoir in Lisle County to select craftsmen who could make horse armor, and use wood chips and iron sheets to make armor for sword and shield soldiers. Soon, the samples were made, and Marin ordered them to be weighed. Because they were mainly made of wood chips, they were not heavy, only 19 pounds. For those strong soldiers, it was not too heavy. As for the number of musketeers and sword and shield soldiers, Marin decided to set it at 250 musketeers and 500 sword and shield soldiers. Including the 250 muscular plate armor infantry, there were exactly 1,000 people. And this is the armed force that Marin used to conquer Newfoundland. Chapter 306: Beaver Skin Trade. Just when Marin had selected 1,000 elite warriors and started training, the governor of Cape Breton Island, Garland, suddenly sent a ship back to report to Marin that they had come into contact with the Indians on Newfoundland Island. It turned out that because the two sides had been fishing together in the Newfoundland fishing grounds for a long time, contact with each other was inevitable. However, for fear of being hurt by the Indians, the fishing boats on Cape Breton Island were generally far away from the coast. However, 2 months ago, a fishing boat on Cape Breton Island had to dock to replenish fresh water because it forgot to bring fresh water. Then, in the process of replenishing fresh water, the ship was surrounded by local Indians. The fishermen were frightened and thought that the Indians were going to hurt them. However, the local Indians did not mean to hurt them. Through gesture communication, these Indians called themselves Biotic people. They were very envious of the tools used by the fishermen on Cape Breton Island, and even the glass beads used for decoration on the fishing boats. So the Beotic people put forward a request for a trade. However, at the beginning, the Beotic people took out fish. But the fishermen on Cape Breton Island are not short of fish, because they are fishermen. So, the Beotics thought about it and took out beaver skins for exchange. Seeing the attitude of the Beotics not to trade and not to let go, the fishermen had to use the boat's knives, harpoons, fishing nets, glass beads, and even the pots and pans and black bread used by the fishermen on the boat to exchange hundreds of beaver skins with the Beotics. Then, the fishermen without tools had to return home first. Originally, those fishermen complained a lot and even felt that they were at a disadvantage. After all, they were the lower class and didn't know how precious those beaver skins were. However, as a newly promoted noble, Garland was also very knowledgeable about luxury goods. When he heard that the fishermen had exchanged hundreds of beaver skins for daily necessities on the boat, he was immediately shocked. You know, before the Siberian mink appeared in Europe, beaver skins have always been one of the precious furs in Europe. A complete beaver skin can be sold for 20 gold coins. Hundreds of beaver skins are worth thousands of gold coins. The total price of the fisherman's boatload of things in the market was no more than 20 gold coins. In other words, the fishermen made hundreds of times more money from this strange trade. Of course, the profits must have been confiscated by Garland. Anyway, these fishermen didn't know the price of precious furs such as beaver skins. However, looking at the Indians, it seems that they have more beaver skins. In fact, there are also many beavers on Cape Breton Island controlled by Garland. However, Garland and the colonists were cautious and did not dare to go deep into the jungle easily before cutting down the trees to avoid being hurt by grizzly bears. Therefore, Garland did not get much beaver skins. However, this trade with the Beotics inspired Garland. We dare not go deep into the jungle and lack manpower, but those Indians can. Those Indians have lived here for generations and have rich experience in catching beavers. In this case, why not use cheap goods to exchange precious beaver skins with them? So Garland sent someone back to Europe by boat to report the situation to Marin. Beaver skin. Marin was stunned. Suddenly, he remembered that in the original history, didn't the French make a fortune by trading in beaver skins? In the original history, in the 17th century, although the French navy was weak, they did not dare to send troops to occupy the North American colonies, so as not to provoke the powerful navy of Spain. However, there were still many French fur traders who secretly ran to Newfoundland and Quebec and other places to make a fortune by trading in beaver skins. At that time, French fur traders sold intact beaver skins back to Europe, with a profit of up to 200 times. Although the profit was not so high later, there were still dozens of times of profit. The French used some ordinary iron pots, axes, swords, glass beads and other worthless goods to exchange a large number of valuable beaver skins from the Indians and accumulated a lot of wealth. It seems that I can also make money by trading in this way. Marin thought. You know, there are at least tens of millions of beavers in North America these days. Especially in the rivers and lakes in the Canadian jungle, beavers are everywhere. Until the 21st century, beavers were still the national animal of Canada. Wait. I think I forgot something. Marin stood up from his office chair and started walking around the room, thinking about what he had forgotten. After a long time, Marin finally remembered, yes, beaver musk, how could I forget this? Marin slapped his head. Before, when a group of perfume blenders were introduced from Rome, those perfume masters told Marin that fixatives were needed to make high-end perfumes, especially perfumes with a long shelf life. For example, musk, beaver musk and ambergris. However, ambergris is too expensive, and musk is rarer than beaver musk. Therefore, the most used is actually beaver musk. However, in Europe, beavers were hunted in large numbers and became very rare. Beaver skin has also become a precious fur. When beavers are scarce, beaver musk has also become an expensive luxury. Therefore, high-end perfumes have low production. However, North America is different. There are so many beavers in Canada. As long as we teach the Indians to cut off the pear-shaped gland sacs that secrete castoreum from female beavers, dry them, and give them to Marin's people to extract castoreum with alcohol. In that case, Marin will have a wide source of fixatives for making high-end perfumes in the future. After all, there are tens of millions of beavers in Canada. Moreover, beavers reproduce every year. The Europeans in Canada have induced the Indians to kill beavers for hundreds of years, but they have not killed all the beavers. It can be seen that beavers have a strong reproductive capacity. Once we start bulk purchases from the Indians, we will purchase a large number of beaver skins and castoreum gland sacs of female beavers. At that time, not only can we make a lot of money from beaver skins, but also perfume fixatives will be extremely abundant. In this way, Marin is fully qualified to produce high-end perfumes in large quantities. With a large number of high-end perfumes, trade with the Ming dynasty can also proceed smoothly. Otherwise, just spending money or exchanging glass, how stupid is that? Even in Europe, high-end perfumes are in short supply. Because ambergris is extremely rare, and musk and castoreum are also rare, high-end perfumes are often rare and expensive. If we continue to acquire beaver skins and acquire a large number of castoreum gland sacs, then castoreum will become a low-cost product in Marin. The cost of making high-end perfumes will be much lower than others, with unparalleled cost advantages and higher competitiveness. Chapter 307, Trade Expansion Model. In his previous life, when Marin was in college, he once listened to a history professor who explained in detail the process of the British and French colonization of North America. Let's talk about Britain first. The British colonial method, in the professor's words, is cutting trees. In the 13 colonies of North America, British colonists cut down trees on a large scale, opened up farmland, and eventually established the North American colonies. However, in terms of their attitude towards the Indians, the British have undergone a huge change. As early as 1609, when the British established their first colony, Jamestown, in Virginia, the British had an extremely tough attitude towards the native Indians. They regarded the native Indians as uncivilized and barbaric animals and implemented a policy of plunder and slaughter. However, this aroused a strong counterattack from the Indians. Then, Jamestown was besieged by the Indians for a long time. In the end, Jamestown ran out of food and there was a tragedy of cannibalism. If the Indians did not know how to capture the castle, perhaps the colonists of Jamestown would have been killed by the Indians. More than a decade later, off the coast of Massachusetts in the north, an immigrant ship called the Mayflower arrived in America. However, unlike the colonists of Jamestown, most of them were poor people and Puritans, and of course there were criminals. At the beginning, these people were very honest, lived in harmony with the Indians, and passed the most difficult stage of gaining a foothold. Even because of the help of the Indians, they created the custom of eating turkey on Thanksgiving. However, when the white people here gained a foothold, they soon drove away and massacred the Indians. While driving the Indians who had helped them into the forest, they swung their wood-cutting axes, cut down the forests, and expanded their territory. In the end, they conquered a large territory on the east coast of North America. Later, the British used this method. When landing in other parts of North America, if they were weak at the beginning, they would pretend to be grandsons and live in peace with the Indians. Once they gained a foothold, they began to turn their faces. Relying on this method, the British gradually controlled the 13 coastal states of North America and became the most successful colonial power in North America. The French seemed to be different from the British. The expansion model they adopted was the trade model. In other words, the expansion was completed by the trade model. The specific approach was to organize a large number of fur traders to go deep inland and trade beaver skins and other leathers with the Indians. The French merchants brought pots, iron axes, swords, glass beads and other goods, which were very popular with the Indians. However, these things were not valuable, but the French merchants exchanged them for expensive furs such as beaver skins and made a lot of profits. In the later period, the French even began to sell guns and gunpowder to the Indians, inciting the Indians to fight each other. After the Indians obtained guns, because the power of guns was much greater than that of earth bows and arrows, the Indians first used guns to hunt animals. Soon, the animals were killed in the territories of the Indian tribes that obtained guns. Even those who survived were frightened away by the huge gunshots. As a last resort, these Indians began to invade the territories of other tribes to hunt animals for furs. However, this obviously seriously infringed on the interests of other tribes. So, tribal wars broke out. The Indian tribes with guns obviously had greater advantages. So, the tribes without guns were defeated, fled, and gave up their territory. However, the defeated tribes were not fools, and they would not be willing to fail. So they also bought guns. If the French did not sell to them, they would buy from the British or the Dutch. The British or the Dutch obviously wanted to use them to attack the French allied tribes. So, both sides had guns. Next, the defeated Indian tribes staged a revenge drama. Both sides shot each other with guns, causing huge casualties. Such dramas were often staged in the jungles of North America, year after year, day after day. In the conflicts between tribes, the Indians lost a large number of strong men. Many weak tribes also disappeared because of the war. In addition, in order to establish good relations with friendly Indian tribes, the French even let young employees marry the daughters of Indian chiefs to strengthen their ties with Indian tribes. But in fact, these young employees all had wives and children in Europe. They married the daughters of Indian chiefs as a means to win over Indian tribes. At the same time, these young men who were full of blood and vigor also needed a female companion to vent their excess energy because their wives were not around. Moreover, these native wives would become the best trade bridge between the French and the Indians. Later, the children born by these French youths and the daughters of local indigenous chiefs became a special ethnic group, the Métis. It can be said that the French colonial methods in North America were very clever. They won over some local tribes and asked them to hunt animals for them to obtain furs. These furs, when sold to Europe, could bring huge profits. In the early days, a beaver skin could make 200 times the super profit when sold to Europe. Even in the later period, the profit was very high, and it could make a profit of several dozen times. The professor believes that the French methods are better than the British. However, the French finally lost because they did not arrange enough immigrants to occupy America. Why did the British surpass France in this regard and complete the occupation of the 13 states of North America? The reason is very simple, because Britain carried out a large-scale enclosure movement in the country, which produced tens of thousands of landless farmers. Except for a small number of people who were absorbed by textile workshops, most of the rest became refugees. And refugees are the root cause of unrest in a country. The Great Ming Empire was finally destroyed by refugees from the north. Even in the early 1980s, the return of educated youth to the city brought great chaos to China at that time. For this reason, Taizong had to resort to the severe crackdown and killed many gangsters to stabilize the society. The British were more cunning. Since there were so many refugees in the country, why don't we send them to North America to open up wasteland? Then, landless farmers, Puritans and criminals, three groups that were not welcome in Britain and were prone to social conflicts, were sent to the east coast of North America by the British authorities to engage in colonization and land reclamation. Although the British colonial methods were relatively rough and not as good as the French. However, relying on the population, they achieved much more brilliant achievements than the French. Moreover, in the process of immigration, the British accepted everyone, not only their own immigrants, but also immigrants from other European countries. For example, a large number of German immigrants were accepted, as well as Irish immigrants, French immigrants, and Dutch immigrants. The large number of immigrants also accelerated the development of North America. However, in the long run, because the composition of immigrants was too complicated, the immigrants did not have a strong centripetal force towards the British royal family. This also laid the seeds for the subsequent North American War of Independence. The French were not incompetent, but because France was stable and did not have so many refugees. Therefore, the French could not create so many refugees like the British who carried out the enclosure movement. Therefore, the French's clever colonial methods were crushed by the British's crude method of piling up numbers. Since Marin knew these problems, he decided to combine the characteristics of Britain and France and take his own route. As for how to do it, in the early stage, it is natural to learn from France, engage in trade expansion mode, and use a group of Indian native tribes to attack other tribes. In addition to purchasing furs, Marin also plans to use European goods that attract Indians to encourage Indians to cut down trees and exchange them for wood. For example, Marin needs a lot of oak, which can be exchanged with Indians and let the Indians cut down trees themselves. After the Indians cut down a lot of trees by the sea, Marin will give them weapons and support them to march inland to seize the territory of other tribes. The original land by the sea became Marin's colony. At the same time, Marin will organize a large number of people to immigrate to North America in Germany and occupy these coastal colonies. Of course, Bishop Taylor will also send disciples who can fool around to teach these immigrants to be loyal to themselves so as not to make the colonies independent. In this way, in the long run, Marin will complete the occupation of the coastal areas of North America by trade, encouraging Indians to cut down trees and fight, and then vacating the land by the sea. As for the inland areas, let's wait for the younger generations to complete it. After all, he was not a god, and without so many immigrants, it was difficult to occupy all the land in North America at once. It would be good enough to occupy the coast first and demarcate the territory. The main reason was that the total population of Germany was only about 12 million. America was so big that even if all Germans were immigrated, they could only occupy the east coast of North America at most, not to mention the inland territories. Chapter 308, England withdraws. The British Isles were in a mess at this time. Under the city of Dublin, the British army had been under siege for a long time, but they could not win. After all, Earl Edward's army was very powerful and could withstand the attack of the British army. However, Earl Edward's army did not dare to attack. Why? Because of the English longbowmen. English longbowmen may not be useful for siege, but they are quite sharp for field battles. As long as they are not wearing plate armor, they will not be able to recover if they are shot. Although hundreds of longbowmen were lost, England still had more than 6,000 longbowmen at this time. As long as Earl Edward's army dared to leave the city, they would definitely be shot into hedgehogs by the rain of arrows from more than 6,000 longbowmen. So the two armies were deadlocked. If it was sunny, the British army would not dare to attack, because the Irish army's muskets and artillery were too lethal. However, it was difficult to attack the city in rainy weather. After all, Earl Edward's army was not a decoration. Moreover, what frustrated the British army the most was that when attacking the city on rainy days, many soldiers often slipped from the ladders and fell down when climbing the city walls. Just because it was slippery on rainy days, more than 300 unlucky British soldiers fell from the siege ladders and were injured, and even a few unlucky people fell to death. Richard Bull was helpless. He had understood that it was basically impossible to capture Dublin by force, because there were probably tens of thousands of troops in the city. Then, he adopted a new method: siege. Richard Bull believed that since Earl Edward had an army of tens of thousands of people, the food consumption must be an astronomical figure. If the other party's food reserves were not enough, then his chance would come. As long as the other party was hungry and the soldiers of the army had no strength, he could capture Dublin by launching a strong attack on a rainy day. And Henry VII also agreed with Richard Bull's tactics. However, Richard Bull waited and waited for a long time, but he did not see the defenders in the city hungry. Every day, the fragrance of food could be wafted from the top of the city. Then, Richard Bull was in a dilemma and told Henry VII about the dilemma. Henry VII also felt it was very difficult, so he summoned the ministers to discuss countermeasures. The ministers also felt very troubled, so they talked about it. Why does Edward have so much food? It shouldn't be. John de Wheeler, Earl of Oxford, was a little confused. You know, it's not so easy to get enough food to feed tens of thousands of troops for several months. Moreover, the King of England had collected all the grain harvested last autumn. There has never been much surplus food in the direct territory of the King of England in Ireland. Obviously, it was funded by the French and the Scots. Johnson, the Minister of the Navy, said affirmatively. But the cost of supporting tens of thousands of troops for several months is very high, said John de Wheeler, Earl of Oxford. Even if a soldier only eats 1 pound of food a day, the daily food consumption of 10,000 troops is 10,000 pounds. If it's more than 3 months, it's 100 days, which is 1 million pounds. 1 million pounds of rye, at the price of 1.5 pence per pound in England, that's 1.5 million pence. Converted into gold coins, that's 25,000 gold coins. This is not a small amount, and it seems that Earl Edward has more than 1 million pounds of grain. The French are willing to bleed in order to make England unlucky. Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, sneered. Isn't it Scotland? Richard Fox, the Lord Chancellor and Bishop of Winchester, asked back. Impossible, Scotland itself is short of food. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, retorted. Scotland has many highlands, and its geographical location in the north and the relatively poor land, so the grain production is not high. It is unlikely to expect Scotland, which is already short of food, to support Earl Edward. Only an agricultural country like France has the ability to support Earl Edward with so much food. In fact, the British ministers did not know that it was not France that supported Earl Edward's food, but Marin's North Sea Chamber of Commerce. Of course, the French also supported some food, but not much. Because Marin had too much food and wanted to see Britain in trouble, he supported Earl Edward with several million pounds. Such a generous gesture moved Edward very much, and he promised that once he won the throne, he would give the owner of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Edison, the title of Earl. How could he know that the so-called Mr. Edison was the famous Marin Hoffman in Europe, the man who was granted a bishopric by the Holy See? How could Marin care about an earl's title? What he wanted was the unrest in England. Even if possible, he wanted to invade England. That means that Edward's food source is France? Henry VII asked. Several other ministers nodded in agreement. Because there is no more reasonable explanation than this. If so, I have a way to delay Edward to death. Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, suddenly said. My dear, please tell me. Henry VII suddenly became energetic. Yes, Your Majesty. I think that although Edward's army is not short of food now, it must be running out. So, he must be looking forward to the autumn harvest. Although Sir Pole's army cannot capture Dublin, it is still necessary to stay there. My opinion is that when the autumn harvest comes, Sir Pole's army will rush to harvest the food in the royal territory, the county of Kildare and the area controlled by the Mac-Moro dynasty, leaving no grain for Earl Edward. In this way, not only will Edward's possibility of obtaining food replenishment be cut off, but also enough food can be replenished for the army on the front line. Our army has enough food, but Edward's army has eaten up all the food. At that time, victory will definitely belong to us. Henry VII thought for a while and said happily, "It's really a good idea. Edward has never had much food. This trick will definitely starve him to death. I'm afraid it won't work." At this time, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, suddenly retorted. "Why?" Henry VII asked dissatisfiedly. "Your Majesty, you seem to have forgotten the Scottish army?" Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, asked back. "Well, weren't they blocked in Yorkshire?" Henry VII asked doubtfully. "That's right, but the Scottish army just didn't capture York. The Earl of Northumberland's words just reminded me that if the Scottish army is also robbing our wheat in the autumn harvest season, what should we do?" For a moment, everyone was stunned. In order to ensure the elimination of Edward's rebels, England allowed the Scottish army to run rampant in northern England. Newcastle, an important northern town, has been conquered and suffered great losses. Now, 10,000 Scottish troops are heading south and besieging York, the capital of Yorkshire, trying to conquer York. Once York is conquered, the Scottish army can continue to move south and enter the heartland of England. Before, everyone thought that as long as the Scottish army did not conquer the city, it would be no big deal. However, they suddenly realized the danger. The Scottish army did not have to conquer York. If they took advantage of the autumn harvest season to rob food in the countryside, England would have no way to deal with it. If too much food is taken away by Scotland, it may bring a huge famine to England. Once England is hit by a great famine, followed by several serf riots and harassment by the Scottish army, the court may be in big trouble. The most terrible thing is that if the autumn harvest is destroyed by the Scottish army, the British finances may cause a huge crisis. If the military rations are not supplied, it may lead to collapse. At that time, everything will be over. Thinking of these serious consequences, the people present suddenly realized that the current priority is to drive the Scottish army out of the country before the autumn harvest. But where can we find such an army now? There is no other way, we can only recall Sir Bowles' army. Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derbyshire, said heavily. "But, Edward." Henry VII was a little depressed. "It's okay, Your Majesty, we can destroy the crops in Ireland before withdrawing." Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derbyshire, said viciously. "You mean?" "That's right. Although we can't hold on until the autumn harvest to grab these grains, we can completely destroy these crops that are about to mature before we withdraw, so that Edward, the little bastard, will have nothing to harvest." Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby, said with a sinister look on his face. "Oh, this plan is really fast." Everyone praised. If the autumn harvest fails to obtain new grain, Earl Edward's tens of thousands of troops will be in trouble. What if the French and Scots provide Edward with new grain after the autumn harvest? It's okay. The English fleet is stronger than the French. As long as we don't keep patrolling the waters south of the island of Ireland, the French will not be able to transport grain in. As for the Scots, we can send ships to patrol outside the coastal port cities of Scotland, and send spies to monitor the Scottish ports to prevent the Scots from transporting grain to the island of Ireland. The old Earl is smart, this trick is really powerful. I think that in a few months, Edward, who has no new grain supply, will collapse first. As long as France and Scotland are not allowed to transport grain to him, his tens of thousands of troops will definitely have no choice but to cut off food. Yes, in order to let them starve to death, this old minister suggests that Richard Pole be ordered to send troops to destroy those crops now. At the same time, kill all the livestock, make them into jerky, and take them away, leaving no food for Edward. Then, our army will withdraw to the port of Liverpool to drive out the Scottish army. If we can destroy this army, it will be even better. Okay, let's do it. Henry VII immediately issued an order, ordering Richard Pole to prepare to withdraw. However, before withdrawing, the British army needed to destroy all the rye fields in the area controlled by Earl Edward, kill all the local livestock, and take away the meat of the livestock into jerky. After doing this, they would withdraw to the port of Liverpool to drive away the Scottish invading forces. Chapter 309, Secret War. Shortly after Henry VII's order was issued, that night, after a palace guard got off work and went home, he also secretly sent a piece of intelligence to a designated place and handed it to a grain shop owner. This shop actually belongs to the private property of Margaret, Countess of Salisbury and Princess of York. It can be said that even Richard Pole, the husband of Princess Margaret, did not know about the existence of this grain store. although Richard Bull has been monitoring the flow of funds at home. However, after Marin's North Sea Chamber of Commerce contacted Princess Margaret earlier, the North Sea Chamber of Commerce secretly funded Princess Margaret with a large sum of money. Moreover, in the grain trade with the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, Princess Margaret also made some tricks, intercepted a lot of money, and concealed the transaction volume. As a grain supplier, the North Sea Chamber of Commerce also actively cooperated with Princess Margaret. In this way, Princess Margaret's private income from grain trade has reached 100,000 gold coins every year. Princess Margaret took out most of the money and used it to bribe some key department personnel in order to obtain various intelligence about Henry VII's court. The palace guard who was on duty today and heard the results of the discussion between Henry VII and the ministers was knocked down by Princess Margaret with 3,000 gold coins. Moreover, the palace guard did not know that the other party was Princess Margaret, and thought that she was just an ordinary noble who was inquiring about the court's movements. After all, no matter which country, there are many people who are keen to inquire about the secrets of the court. Because, mastering this information is very beneficial for being an official or doing business. However, this guard brother did not know that Princess Margaret mastered this information in order to overthrow Henry VII's court. Otherwise, he would not have the courage to cooperate with Princess Margaret. Of course, he did not know that the object of cooperation was Princess Margaret. After the grain store owner got the information, he quickly contacted a trusted maid of Princess Margaret and secretly delivered the information to Princess Margaret. Speaking of which, because of the escape and rebellion of Earl Edward, Princess Margaret is now also the focus of Henry VII's monitoring. If it were not for the face of his subordinate Richard Bull, Henry VII might have killed Princess Margaret long ago. Therefore, Princess Margaret is very careful now. In her residence, the only people who really get her trust are 2 maids and several old loyal servants. Others, whether Henry VII's people or Richard Bull's people, are monitoring Princess Margaret. Fortunately, Princess Margaret is a very scheming woman. Moreover, when the North Sea Chamber of Commerce contacted her, it also taught her a lot of knowledge about underground work. And this knowledge is actually the knowledge of the second knife that Marin learned from watching those spy war movies in his previous life. But in this era, it is definitely an advanced concept. Princess Margaret, who was instructed by the intelligence personnel of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, became more and more like a qualified female spy. After getting the intelligence, she was shocked. She knew very well that if her brother's army ran out of food, there would be only one way to go. So, she hurriedly sent her maid out, and in the name of purchasing, she quietly slipped the intelligence to the spy of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce in a shop on the street. After the people of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce got this intelligence, they also felt that it was a matter of great importance. So, they immediately sent people to take a boat, first sailing towards Denmark, then turning south, and send it to East Frisia, and handed it over to Marin. Hiss, what a vicious plan. Seeing the intelligence, Marin sweated. You know, the area controlled by Earl Edward, including the direct territory of the King of England, the Earl of Kildare and the territory of the MacMorrough dynasty, has a population of about 70,000 to 80,000. Including 10,000 troops and the citizens in Dublin, it is estimated to be close to 100,000. If the British destroyed all the crops and killed all the livestock, these nearly 100,000 people would fall into a food crisis. Earl Edward's army was fine, because Marin had transported £6 million of rye to him, which could sustain Dublin for a long time. However, if the 70,000 or 80,000 people outside the city had no food, the entire territory would be in chaos. Now that the British have just destroyed the crops and killed all the livestock, those honest Irish civilians don't think anything of it. When the British leave, they have nothing to eat, and serious social problems will arise. In other words, even if the British leave, they have dug a huge pit for Earl Edward before they leave. If it is not handled properly, Earl Edward's 10,000 troops will be deeply trapped in 70,000 or 80,000 hungry people, and they will have no energy to compete with Henry VII for hegemony. Because the hungry people will be thinking about the food in Dublin. At that time, civil unrest will easily occur. After the civil strife is over, it will be much easier for the British to clean up the mess. That's not all. If the British army leaves Ireland and lands in Liverpool, and the Scots are unaware, the British will move north and accidentally cut off the retreat of the 10,000 Scottish troops. If the Scottish army's retreat is cut off, there is only one way to go. After all, the British army still has 18,000 troops left. In addition, more than 6,000 of them are longbowmen with strong attack power. If the Scottish army is blocked, it will be easy to destroy the Scottish army. If the 10,000 Scottish troops are destroyed, the Kingdom of Scotland will be finished. As long as the British destroy the main force of the Scottish army, they can take advantage of the situation to go north, destroy the Kingdom of Scotland, and unify Great Britain. Marin immediately felt the seriousness of the situation, so he immediately sent a ship to send a message to King James IV of Scotland in the name of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce to prevent the Scottish army from being blocked by the main force of the British army. Moreover, in the letter, Marin suggested that the Scottish army give up the siege of York and rush to Liverpool first to destroy all the docks of Liverpool port, making it difficult for the main force of the British army to land. Then, when they turned around and retreated, they learned Thomas Stanley's poisonous plan, destroyed the crops of the English along the way, and killed all the cattle and sheep of the English. In this way, when the Scots withdrew to their country, basically, Merseyside, Yorkshire, Durham, Cumbria and Northumberland along the way, and other northern areas of England would fall into severe famine. This move is definitely a heavy blow to England. Moreover, in the letter, Marin strongly suggested that the Scottish army turn south on the way to retreat north, and harm Thomas Stanley's fiefdom Derbyshire, so that this old shady man would taste the bitter fruit of his own poisonous plan. As long as the port of Liverpool was destroyed, the landing of the British army would definitely be delayed. Moreover, now, the British army probably received an order to start to harm Ireland. After receiving the order, the Scottish army had enough time to harm the northern part of England. When the northern part of England is ravaged by the Scottish army and has no food to eat, a large number of refugees will appear, and then go south, becoming a factor of social instability in Britain. At that time, Henry VII will have a headache. However, Earl Edward will have a headache after Ireland was ravaged. Suddenly, Marin remembered the details of the intelligence Henry VII ordered people to monitor the coastal ports of Scotland, but did not say to block the north side of the strait between Ireland and England. Can I send a ship to bypass the north of Scotland and then quietly send some more food to Earl Edward? In addition, Marin also sent a letter to the intelligence personnel of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce in London, asking them to notify Princess Margaret and let him kill the palace guard who delivered the message. Otherwise, it is easy for people to follow the clues and find out about Princess Margaret. After all, this time I used this intelligence to turn England around, which could easily cause Henry VII's wrath. If a strict investigation is carried out, the guard will definitely be exposed. If Margaret's intelligence network is exposed, Princess Margaret will not be able to survive. It may even implicate the North Sea Chamber of Commerce's intelligence organization in London. Chapter 310 Spy School. Marin sent a speedboat and quickly delivered the news to Edinburgh in the name of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce. King James IV of Scotland was shocked. If the English really wiped out the 10,000 troops, Scotland would basically be finished. Because the main force of Scotland is only 15,000 people. If those 10,000 people are gone, Scotland will wait to be unified by England. At the same time, James IV agreed to the poisonous plan provided by Marin in the name of Mr. Edison, without thinking. In the eyes of James IV, he had offended Henry VII to death by sending troops to England. Therefore, the other army will definitely not let him go when he returns home. It is better to follow the advice of Mr. Edison, not to kill people, but to rob all the food, destroy all the crops, kill all the livestock, and take the livestock meat into jerky and bacon. In this way, several counties in northern England will inevitably fall into famine. At that time, his army will withdraw to Scotland for defence and leave the mess to England. You know, although the population of several counties in northern England is very small. There are 3 million English people, but only 300,000 in the north. However, 300,000 refugees are definitely enough for the English court to drink a pot. At that time, it will not be a problem of war between the two countries, but the problem of 300,000 hungry people in the northern counties that the English court will worry about. If one is not handled well, it will cause an armed uprising of hungry people. Therefore, King James IV of Scotland decisively sent cavalry south and issued an order to the 10,000 troops to stop besieging York City, and then divide the troops into two groups. 3,000 people went directly west and arrived at the port of Liverpool. Without attacking the city, they directly forced the local people to demolish the Liverpool dock. Then, this group of people began to loot the villages near Liverpool and the unwalled towns, robbing all the food and killing all the livestock to make jerky and bacon. Even plough horses and guard dogs were not spared, and they were all killed and made into jerky or bacon. After looting the area near Liverpool, this force did not need to join the main force, but went north along the west coast, robbing food, killing livestock for jerky, and destroying all the docks along the way, even the docks of fishing villages. In this way, the possibility of the Scottish army being outflanked by the English army was minimized. Because the other side had no landing point on the west side. As for the remaining 7,000 main forces, James IV ordered that after the main force of the army abandoned York City, it would go directly south to loot the villages of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. Then, return north along the original route and loot the villages of Yorkshire again, making sure not to leave food for anyone in the local area. However, no one was killed. Moreover, their hoes, sickles and other iron farm tools were not robbed. Because those were their weapons for making trouble and rebellion in the future. Because of the looting of the villages in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, James IV estimated that more than 400,000 people in England would have no food to eat this time. At that time, England will definitely have a hard time. At the same time, after Princess Margaret in London received the suggestion from Mr. Edison, the owner of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce, to kill the palace guard, she pushed the task of killing back to the North Sea Chamber of Commerce. The reason is that Princess Margaret did not have a special assassin. After all, she was the focus of Henry VII's surveillance, and it was good enough to be able to do intelligence work. If you dare to raise an assassin and get discovered, you will definitely die. In desperation, the London branch of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce took on this task. However, they, who had received simple training from Marin, also knew how to use the method of framing. They sent a French-speaking intelligence officer, disguised as a Frenchman, to find the underground forces in London and offer a reward for the head of the palace guard. But as soon as they turned around, they sent their own killer to assassinate the palace guard who was off duty with a dagger engraved with French inscriptions. In this way, when the British investigate later, they will point the finger at France and get themselves out of it. Moreover, there is no Sherlock Holmes detective in London at this time. As long as it is framed like this, the British will most likely believe it. Anyway, Marin has been lurking. Even the branch of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce in London uses the name of the Danes. Obviously, there is no conflict between Denmark and England, and they even have frequent exchanges and good relations. Therefore, it is difficult for the British to suspect a Danish Chamber of Commerce. After all, in Europe, spy wars have not yet emerged. Marin, a half-baked guy, has enough spy war movies and novels watched on TV and the internet. Perhaps in this incident, Marin felt the great usefulness of spies, and suddenly decided to go to the spy school in the east of the city to inspect it. This spy school was established at the beginning of this year. Its purpose is to train spies to infiltrate Denmark, the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg, and to inquire about the military movements of the other side. After all, these three countries are currently Marin's biggest hostile countries, and Marin needs to guard against their joint attacks. Therefore, Marin planned to train a group of spies to lurk in these three countries to find out the military movements of the other side. It is not difficult to train spies to the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg, because these two countries are also German-speaking countries. But it is very difficult to train spies to Denmark. Because the other side is a Danish-speaking country. It takes several years to train a German to speak fluent Danish. Therefore, in desperation, Marin had to send people to the Danish area in the north of the Principality of Schleswig to select a group of Danish youths who were willing to be loyal to him as his intelligence officers and send them to Copenhagen to find out the news. This spy school was completely established by Marin, a layman, and Kohler, who was half knowledgeable. However, the traditional intelligence system established by Kohler was full of loopholes in Marin's view. For example, many of the intelligence officers selected by Kohler were gangsters. Such people can be a gossip and inquire about some not very confidential information. If you want to find out very confidential information, you need very professional people. Moreover, Marin had seen traditional intelligence personnel, such as some street thugs and gossipers, and at first glance, they were not serious people. If he was more alert, he would be suspicious directly. For example, if he asked those traditional intelligence personnel to follow, those guys looked shifty and did not look like good people, and did not meet the appearance requirements of intelligence personnel at all. If the police came, they would definitely arrest them for questioning first. Moreover, their eyes were too direct when they followed, and their shifty eyes kept scanning. People who were more sensitive could easily find that they were following. Therefore, Marin, a half-baked intelligence expert, asked Kohler to recruit those who looked honest but not really honest. Such people have very deceptive appearance. Even if he stood in front of you, you would not think he was an intelligence officer. Just like Shah Jahan stood in front of you, would you think he was a spy? Marin was also impressed by the directors of those anti-Japanese dramas. What kind of actors did they choose? One by one, the men were handsome and the women were beautiful. They were the focus wherever they went. Could they be intelligence personnel? Moreover, they all have haircuts in various cool and beautiful styles. If they are really seen by the Japanese, the women will definitely be caught and raped, and the men, especially the young and handsome ones, will also be caught and raped. After all, there are gays in the Japanese. Only those with a common face that people can't remember are suitable intelligence personnel. Of course, in some occasions where beauty traps are needed, beautiful female spies are also needed. However, there are relatively few of them. After entering the spy school, Ma Lin began to observe the drills of the students. After all, they make a living by performing, and spies also need acting skills, and the requirements are higher than those of actors. If an actor has poor acting skills, at most he will be criticized by the audience. But if a spy has poor acting skills, he may lose his life. Therefore, the acting requirements for spies are much higher than those for actors. For them, acting skills are the guarantee of life safety. Seeing the wonderful performances of the spy students, Ma Lin seemed to have come to the Beijing Film Academy and the Central Academy of Drama to watch the stars acting. However, some lines made Marin feel very shocking and embarrassed, because those lines were compiled into the textbook by him. For example, two spy students were rehearsing a secret street play, The King Covers the Earth. A spy student whispered the code in weird Chinese. The pagoda suppresses the demon. Louis XII would probably get mad if he understood its meaning. The other person who was in contact immediately joined in with weird Chinese pronunciation. Then, the two held hands together. "I finally found you, comrade." Of course, this was said in German. Some spy students also used such contact codes. "Boss, give me a box of Lao Dao cigarettes." Lao Dao is sold out, only De Qianmen is left. The reason why Chinese was used as a code was that Marin was in a spur of the moment. At that time, Marin believed that no one in Europe understood Chinese, and using Chinese as a contact code was absolutely unique. So, at that time, he added several Chinese codes to the spy introductory textbook, and also annotated the phonetic symbols. However, watching the spy trainees perform on the spot, Marin had an urge to cover his face. Because he felt too stupid. But the spy trainees didn't know that these two jokes were used too much in later generations. They were very excited when rehearsing, and their faces were serious and solemn. Marin had to resist the urge to laugh, and continued to watch their rehearsals, and applauded from time to time to encourage. Because at the end of this year, this student will go to his job and serve Marin. For these young people who risked their lives to work for him, Marin believed it was necessary to give them enough respect. Moreover, Marin would also give preferential treatment to their families. Their families would stay in the rear and be fed by Marin. Of course, while being treated preferentially, these family members also became hostages in disguise to prevent these spies from rebelling. As long as these spies have served him for enough years or made enough contributions, Marin will transfer them back to serve as teachers in the spy school, rest assured of retirement, and give them generous treatment. At the same time, it also helps to train young spies. If a spy unfortunately dies, their family will continue to be treated well until their parents die and their children grow up and have the ability to support themselves.